After February 24th, our life was divided. Now we think about the time before the war and the time since the start. The people in this video woke up from the explosion that happened in this place right behind me in the city of Uman. And this is our story. I woke up from the explosions. It felt like the sun was shining right through the window. It was nighttime outside, but it felt like the sun was right there. And after a few seconds, we heard an explosion, and our blinds bounced from the shockwave. I heard the first explosion, but I thought I was still sleeping. And so after that first explosion, I went over to the window, and at that very moment, a second missile hit. And when I saw that mushroom cloud, they had blown up an ammunition warehouse. I ran to wake up my wife and my kids. I remember that I was really angry because I got a call at about 5:30 in the morning. And I was thinking, who could be so brash and rude to be calling so early? I checked. It was Lyosha Orel. I killed it. I ignored the call. He calls again. So I answered and asked, Lyosha, do you have something urgent? He said, Pasha, can you also hear the blasts by you? I said, no, what happened? And while I was talking to him, I'm looking at my phone and I keep getting calls, one after another. It was different people that were calling me. And at that moment, we heard 2 fighter jets flying overhead. Anya said, it's war. And I said, no, there's just hooligans hanging out outside. But soon, I myself realized that the war had started. I tried to calm Anya down, and I thought I would go back to bed and try to fall asleep. But my heart was racing. I couldn't fall asleep. I couldn't even close my eyes. The first thing I did, I grabbed my phone from the nightstand, and there were already messages on Telegram about explosions. Then I went to the window, and I saw a mushroom cloud from an explosion. And I got really scared seeing my pregnant wife lying on the bed next to me with my young son, and my heart ached for them. There was a second explosion, and there was a mushroom cloud that, honestly, I associated it with a nuclear mushroom cloud. It was massive. The windows started shaking. We heard the blast wave right away. We realized that the war had started. And Sergei woke me up and said, come here, I gotta show you something. We went to the kitchen, went up to the window, and there was a mushroom cloud. I didn't really understand what it was. I said, wow, that's beautiful. What is it? Sergei said, the war has started. Everything inside me just stopped. You don't know what to do, what's going to happen next, what emotions you should have. We knelt down right there, prayed by the window, and then everything started. I had such a state of panic, such a state of fear. I was so confused. I didn't know what to do. Should I get dressed? Should I pack our bags? Should I call people? I was so lost that I just took the Bible, went into the hallway, sat down, and held it like this close to my heart. And then the phone rang. When we arrived at our church, people were already there. Alyona started helping. She was sending messages to people to check in with them. And by the time we got to the church, like I said, the people were already there. And those people started coming over to us, asking us questions. What should we do? And that's when you understand that, man, I need to pull myself together here. I'm telling you though, when your family is more or less safe, somehow, some way, you can begin to think about other people. You know, if I could go back, I probably would have tried to call more people. It was morning at the time, and I remember saying to my husband, Balak here, we need to call Oksana Osipovich. They don't have a vehicle. They won't be able to make it here to the church. And when they finally did arrive, her along with her husband, I realized just how timely that phone call was. Now, perhaps someone would have called later, but knowing them just at that moment, how they process things, it was just perfect timing. I saw the incoming call from Alyonka, and she asked me, Oksana, where are you guys? And I said, we're at home, and I don't know what to do. I was in such a panic. I'm sure she could hear it in my voice. She said, it's okay, do what you need to do, we'll come pick you up. 2 weeks before the beginning of the war, I got a call from my pastor friend, and he said, "Pasha, what will you do when the war starts?" I said, "There's not going to be a war." He said, "Pash, what are you going to do?" And at that moment, I tensed up. I realized that something was going to happen. So I gathered the family and said, if the war starts, we may not have cell service, we should be ready to go in a half an hour and leave, and we should head for the Carpathian Mountains where it will be more safe. I also gathered the leadership team of our church and said, friends, if the war starts, the first thing we should do is gather here, and in half an hour, up to an hour, we should leave for a safe place. I also had a conversation with my pastor friends who survived the beginning of the war in 2014 in the east of Ukraine. And they told me the first thing to do is to take care of your family and children. Take them to a safe place so that you are not paralyzed, because if your family is unprotected and there's an explosion somewhere or a plane flying overhead, you'll constantly be thinking of where your family is, where your children are. And so I started getting ready. What's interesting is that the leadership team of the church told me, Pasha, calm down. Nothing's going to happen. And when everything started that morning on February 24th, we really started mobilizing at such a fast pace. We started searching for fuel, buying generators, food. We were able to delegate the work. On the very first morning, Valek and some of the guys who stayed in Uman took on a huge load of work, because at that moment we had already left the city. And it broke my heart even more because I was thinking, I can't be there with them. And so what did we do? We kept in touch. We were constantly consulting and talking. There's a moment deeply etched in my memory. It's when we were first heading down into our church building, seeing so many different people there, many of whom I didn't know. I went over and introduced myself, and there was already this sense of panic, and I was trying to help people calm down. It was the kind of morning that is an example of how the church is a place where people can unite and encourage others and provide some direction on what they can do. And we had to delegate the work, the tasks, to everyone around who knew what to do. The guys and I started sending some people to look for fuel, others to look for food, because huge lines were already forming everywhere. I remember that time. You have money, you have card, you have cash, but when you get to the gas station, no one's there. And we were just driving around the city. We heard explosions. The planes were flying right over 5-story apartment buildings. I mean, buzzing the rooftops. Everything inside of you tightens up. But you understand that you're responsible for the people that are now in this basement, and you have to set aside your fear and just go and help them however you can and with whatever strength you have. And by 11 a.m., we had decided to leave Uman because the explosions continued. Missiles kept flying into the city. We drove about 80 kilometers from here to Rizhanivka, spent the night there, and the next day we decided to go to the Carpathian Mountains. But the most difficult thing was when the guys came back from their elders meeting and said, we're going to the Transcarpathian region. My heart was just broken. It was really hard for me because we were staying with my relatives at that time. And I realized they were all going to be staying in Uman, and I didn't know if I would see them again. And it was the hardest decision of my life, to obey, to submit to my husband. I have a friend in the Carpathian Mountains. I called him before the war, actually. I said, Sasha, if the war starts, I will come to you. He said, it is not a problem at all. You are welcome to come, of course. I said, you didn't understand. I'm going to bring the entire church. And he said, you didn't understand. Half an hour before you get here, call me. And that's how it happened on the morning of February 25th, when we decided to head for the Transcarpathian region. We realized there would be a lot of people, around 60 to 70 people, because by the time we left Uman, more and more people had gathered and were just sticking with the group. In the end, we had 11 cars, around 70 people in them, and if I'm not mistaken, around 28 kids alone were with us, and we headed for the Carpathian Mountains. It was a really difficult trip. There were 3 rows of cars on a 2-lane road. Traffic jams, people driving into oncoming traffic, and that's how people were driving. The situation was incomprehensible, just massive traffic jams. We realized there was nowhere to fill up our gas tanks. So I called another friend of mine in Vinnytsia and said, Kostya, we need fuel. He told us to come. He filled up all of our cars. Every single car, full tank. He didn't know what would happen next, but they had some extra stock, and they gave it to us. You know, they just gave it to us. And it might not have been every last drop that they had, but it was a large amount for sure. And at that moment, I really felt the treasure of friendship. We had always kept in touch and invested in the relationship, but in those kinds of moments, it's tested. In one lane, there were 3 rows of cars. Some people would cross into oncoming traffic. Some people would break the rules. It was a rough situation, really difficult to understand. I was leading our caravan of 11 cars. Again, there were 3 lanes. Cars were not moving. And so I led our caravan off to the left, kind of creating a 4th lane, because there was no space to move forward. There was only one open lane of oncoming traffic, theoretically for the military to use, but hardly anyone was going that way. No one was going that way. There was just a sliver of asphalt. The edge of the road, it's like the emergency lane. I led our caravan of 11 cars, and we would drive like that. I remember at one point, we drove in the oncoming traffic lane for like a half an hour. Half an hour straight in the oncoming traffic lane. The second oncoming traffic lane, the second one, the 4th from the right, and we didn't have a single car going towards us. Our 11 cars were driving and just kind of breaking through all of the traffic. And there were 3 more rows of cars next to us. In general, it was such a psychological pressure that no one was going in the other direction at all. You realize the entirety of Ukraine was simply going to this side of the country, and it was scary. In the first 3 months of the war, we evacuated more than 1,000 people and delivered more than 150 tons of humanitarian aid along the front lines. When I was driving from Western Ukraine to Eastern Ukraine and the rest of the country is going in the other direction, I remember thinking, where am I going? Maybe I'm doing something wrong here. But it was during that second, or was it the first week, that we had already organized everything regarding humanitarian aid with the help of Pasha, elders of the church, other churches, partners. We were already by the second week taking aid in. I remember a story from when we were helping evacuate people. We would typically drive in a caravan, and we would take people from eastern Ukraine, from hot spots, and take them to central Ukraine. And from central Ukraine, we'd take them all the way to the border. And I remember when we arrived in Khmelnytskyi, which is in the western part of central Ukraine, there was less room in our cars than for the people who were standing there waiting for a ride. And I remember this terrible feeling, thinking we might have to leave someone behind. But instead of that, we decided to just fill our cars with more people than is legally allowed and drove on. I remember that period when Vlad went to evacuate people for the first time. And I remember how we said goodbye. The first time we said goodbye. And one of those situations when my car was overloaded, I was driving people to Lviv, and I realized I had more children in the car than was allowed. In a car with 8 seats, there were 12 to 13 of us, and we were stopped at a block post by the military, and I realized there might be some questions here. The soldier looked inside the car, saw how many children I had, and said, "Turn off your engine, wait here." And then he left. Many thoughts crossed my mind about what was going to happen next. There was so much tension. But to my surprise, the soldier came back with a bag of fresh apples for us in his hands, gave treats to the children, wished us a good trip, and sent us on our way. All of this is about Ukraine. It's about our people. In general, I am shocked that such a small country like us is still fighting with such a Goliath. It is shocking, but at the same time, it encourages us that we all stand united together. It is not an exaggeration that I was answering calls 24/7. It really was 24/7. Many people were passing through Uman, and they needed a place to stay. And I found contacts of neighbors, churches, gyms, schools, cafes, and many other places where people could stay. Even my neighbors, whom I didn't know at all, and not only my neighbors, but neighbors of neighbors from different houses in our region, would just call me. I don't know where they got my number, but they would tell me, "We want to help. We can put people up for the night." I don't have much space, but I can accommodate one person with a dog because I also have a dog. But I really want to help. Please find me someone to stay with me. They were begging me to find people to stay with them for the night. For me, it showed this beautiful side of our Ukrainian people. People were very open-hearted. One more person needs to be saved. One more person needs to be saved. And that's what we lived through during the first month. And it's like you don't have the right to rest or hug your relatives. You just have to save one more person. And that's how I felt. It was burning inside of me. Sometime in the middle of March, there was a moment when elderly people started to leave their homes. And emotionally, this was the moment for me when I realized that this is bad. This is really bad. If elderly people are leaving, and they're the ones that usually stay at home until the very last moment, it's hard for them to leave. I realized that this is going to be long. This is going to last a long time. This will not end quickly. The most difficult moment for me was making the decision that we would go through all of this together as a family. I would not be sending my family across the border. Masha told me, if you want to send me abroad, send me together with you. I understood that she was not going without me. I saw my children crying and praying, Lord, don't let Dad go away. Don't let him be taken. Don't let him die. I remember how the church changed when people were staying here, when there was a warehouse with food supplies. That's what our church premises turned into. The church became a volunteer hub, a place of various initiatives, and a union of various efforts to serve the displaced and local people who are in any kind of need. I have never seen so many people near the church premises before. There were just lines and lines, and I understood that they were there to receive aid. So many of the people that were fleeing, going to the west, going to Lviv, or abroad to Poland, somewhere in that direction, they stopped for the night in Uman. And maybe you saw that. Maybe you remember that there really were millions of people, literally millions of people were leaving. And just imagine, millions of people are driving. And there was so much traffic that the last 40 kilometers to Uman took a person 6 hours because it was almost impossible to drive. And consequently, people who had been driving for 3 days straight needed to stop and spend the night somewhere to rest emotionally and physically. And so they stayed at our place for the night. Sometimes they might stay for 2 or 3 nights. And that's what I was doing. I welcomed people. I tried to make it more or less comfortable for them to spend the night here. I offered them food. I talked with them. I tried to encourage them that they should live on. And that is the main idea that I was communicating. No matter what happens, they should live on. We saw that the city needed us. It's actually an interesting moment now that I think about it. In these city chats, official Telegram channels of the city of Uman, someone forwarded them to us. The city was announcing that there were 5 places in Uman. Remember, this is the beginning of the war, the first months. They were saying there's 5 places in our city where you can get humanitarian aid. Out of those 5 places, 4 of them were churches, and one of them was a social service, a government service. And one of those 4 churches was ours. And it's really impressive that the city might not have fully understood the need for the church until the war revealed that. And we became an answer for so many people. The church was used as a warehouse. Even children were helping carry humanitarian aid. Our Sonia had just turned 1. She just started walking, and she was helping carrying some cologne, stuff that we were stocking up. She saw what we were doing and followed in our footsteps. Seeing as the church was open 24/7, because people came not only during the day, but also at night, sometimes after the curfew, police came to ask us who we were and what we were doing, because they had seen the people coming at night. And we told them who we were and what we were doing. And we invited them to come inside too because it was still winter. It was still cold and rainy outside. They were patrolling 24/7, all night long. And so we invited them to come inside to warm up. And they took us up on that. They would take turns. For example, 4 officers would rest, and the other 4 would be patrolling for 2 hours. And then they would swap. And so it made it easier for them to work through the night because they were understaffed. And I remember that it was the same brigade. We saw the same brigade come in every other night. And so every other night we saw the same people. There were police officers, Army Reserve soldiers, even 1 or 2 members of the armed forces. And those were the different brigades. We arrived to Uman and joined in with the ministry of the church. And the entire time we were staying in Uman, the first couple of weeks, we were filling out documents and submitting them so that we could go abroad. And during that time, we were asked to join the ministry while we were here. And we did that. And in a week's time, we understood that we actually didn't want to go abroad. We received all the documents we needed, and we just put them aside. And we made the decision that we wanted to stay in Ukraine. We saw a need, a great need of people, and the opportunity to be useful in meeting those people's needs. In the beginning, we helped everyone with whatever they needed, except for buying them a home or finding them work. Aside from that, we helped with everything. There were various kinds of products, bags full of groceries and aid that even included chocolate bars, juices, milk. We did what was necessary for that time. And people found what they needed. Some needed food, some needed fellowship. The church invited us. Can you guys help us? Of course, we said yes. We wanted to do something for our country. We decided to do what we could. The church bought a generator, found finances for food, and people were coming just to spend time together, talking to one another. And everyone got what they needed the most. For some, that was food. For some, that was fellowship. For some, both. When people arrived, basically, more or less, they all had the same story. It was totally unexpected. The war started. They left everything behind, had worries about everything, spent a few days on the road, getting help from other people. But I really remember one person, a man somewhere around 35 years old. I don't remember his name. He came here with his family. He had a wife and 2 children, I believe. I remember it very well. I even took a photo of it. They arrived with nothing. And he found a cardboard box and made himself slippers. And it was so joyful for me that a person like that wasn't discouraged. It was something I vividly remember. I remember 2 stories. It was with Lyubov Ilinichna and with Tatiana. You met Tatiana in the Social Protection Department, and they just came to the church to get humanitarian aid. Lyubov Ilinichna was in her 70s, and she came, and I promised to put her on the list of recipients for humanitarian aid. But due to the large flow of people, her application kind of got lost in the pile. And after she had already been attending our church for a month, she came over to me and asked, "Alyonka, can you please provide some aid for me at some point, maybe for this next month?" I remembered who she was and realized that she had found something more than just humanitarian aid at the church. When we were engaged in humanitarian aid, transporting it to various cities, the Kyiv region was liberated. So we went to Irpin, to Bucha, and then we went even deeper, to places that had not even been reached yet. We went to Nova Zalicia. An interesting thing is that, honestly, we didn't really even know where we were going. We didn't know who would show us where to go. It was morning. We were about to leave. Our 2 vans were full. We were carrying groceries, which we wanted to deliver to places where groceries had not even been delivered yet. And off we went. Having reached Bucha, we met a believer, and he said, "I will guide you. I know where Nova Zalicia is. I've heard from the city council that nothing has reached there yet. Let's go to the village council." And we actually said we did not want to go to the village council because we didn't really trust them. We wanted this to be done through the local church, and we knew it would definitely be delivered to each person that way. He agreed to help us find a church. The following morning, he called and got contact information. We got the contact information of Aunt Lida. We called her and said, "We're bringing the groceries. We're coming to the church." And that woman told us the story that the day before, she had been asking God for food. And she didn't know the man who had brought us there, the one who showed us where to go. We arrived, unloaded, and she was just crying and said that yesterday, on her knees, she had asked God for food to feed the people who lived there. And that evening when she was praying on her knees, we were packing the vans, not knowing where we would even be going the next day. And this is just an incredible story of how God foresaw and answered the prayer of this Aunt Lida, who had been left alone and had no one by her side. She didn't know anyone, and she didn't have any connections or contacts, but she knew God and begged the Lord to give her people food. And that's how we got to her that morning. It was God's foresight. There was even one journalist from the Chernihiv region who said, "I've always known that there are churches like this, that there are people like this, but I didn't know that you could do things like this." And she said, "I will tell everyone about you. I'll write an article." And she made posts about us and about our church. And it was very well done. And I think these are the times when the church should show itself. I remember 5 women, and they were just absolutely incredible. I think they were all from the Donetsk region, if I'm not mistaken. They all lived, as far as I understood, in the same neighborhood, but in different houses, but they had a shared front yard. And they all left and came here. They all stayed with us in Uman. When they got here, they told me how happy they were. Even though it was war, they made it here. They were all together, and it was such an encouragement for them. It was like having a piece of their family, a piece of their front yard, and the people with whom they used to live their lives with were now all there together. Within the period of that month, we became very close with them. It was a wonderful relationship. And when they got help for the last time, we took pictures, hugged, and thanked each other. It was very nice. I've talked about it with some people, telling them we have a unique story. We took the entire church to the Carpathian Mountains. We saved everyone's lives. No one was lost. We started serving from there, and God gave us many new opportunities. We built a large warehouse there in the mountains. There were loads of humanitarian aid goods delivered. A bunch of people were evacuated abroad, and we provided them with living conditions, good conditions for thousands of people. But some people say, "No, Pasha, you guys ran away. Not everyone views things the way you do." But in fact, I think we acted according to the instructions. We acted and followed the most balanced, careful path. Careful, but at the same time, well, you just need to act according to the instructions and then think. Act, then think. But I don't see it just as instructions. I see it as the hand of God. I'm sure we had to follow that path. Because if we hadn't gone there, then we wouldn't have had the opportunities we did. And everything that happened here, everything that started here, would not have happened at all. It was just God's hand that led us like that. He took us and led us, and He brought us here today. Now I understand what it's like to live by faith. I live by faith, I trust God, I see how God takes care of our family, and I see how He leads me in this direction, this humanitarian aid direction. And as a Christian, I have to be socially active to help the community and to help Ukraine. It's true, Ukrainians have been united. I was also impressed by the people in Uman. They are absolutely different. We didn't expect that. Personally, I didn't expect that people could be so humane, so sincere, and so capable of helping like that. I was impressed by the people. After an extremely negative treatment in Bucha in comparison to a very nice one in Uman, I was impressed by Uman with its people and humanity. I remember how I traveled and spent nights in Dnipro. I spent nights in Khmelnytsky. I spent nights in different cities. And it doesn't matter where you spend the night, whether it's on a chair, on the floor, on a mattress. You have this feeling that my home is not just Uman. It's not just Cherkasy or any other city. My home is Ukraine. If we had to live the year 2022 again, we would have lived it the exact same way.